I know I had clarity on what I wanted, the same kind of clarity that you got from the podcast 2015. You may not have known exactly what to do with it on that day, but you figured it out. And you realized that podcasting was definitely going to be a part of your future self.
Podcast by Friday with Bill Griggs and Kingsley Grant. We help people to create their minimal viable podcast by taking bold action to defeat procrastination and to get their voices heard.
I am Kingsley Grant.
And I'm Bill Griggs.
And we are the hosts of Podcast by Friday.
Kingsley, this is a wonderful opportunity for us today to get to speak with someone that you and I both respect immensely. It's a really great joy for me because I consider Joel Boggess, our guest, to be one of my mentors. And, you know, we've been doing these episodes where we discuss the different formats that we can use for podcasts. And this is our interview-style podcast.
And who better to have on an interview-style podcast than the man himself, Joel Boggess from Relaunch. Joel, welcome to the show. Good to have you, my friend. How are you doing today?
Kingsley, you know what? It seems like it was just yesterday when I saw you last. Oh my gosh! Wait a minute! It was yesterday.
Seemed that way.
You know what, boy? That was so much fun seeing you up in the Boston area to present at the Elite Man Conference, and I always look forward to being able to hang out with you, and that was a lot of fun. And then having being on a podcast with Bill, that is something really, really special to me because I'm actually met him Podcast Movement 2015, and Pei and I and Russ Johns, you know, had a piece of helping him learn how to create, develop, launch, and grow his podcast. So to be invited by both of you to be on an interview, that double pleasure.
Oh, Joel, you really underestimated your contribution to helping me to get unstuck and to get launched in the podcast. And, you know, your bona fides, your bio is just, you know, to me is amazing. Some of the things that you've done. And you're a syndicated podcast host, a best-selling author, and a speaker. And you've been teaching people how to relaunch their lives and get started with confidence. And to me, that is just phenomenal because I was in need of a relaunch. And, you know, I got lucky. I happened to sign up for a class that you and Pei and Russ were teaching at the Podcast Movement Conference, and it really changed my life.
Well, I remember the very moving conversation that we had. You came up to me, if I remember correctly, during a break or during lunch or something, and I could see that there was more to your story, your personal story, than you were sharing at that time, because, you know, we were in a classroom full of people. Mm-hmm. So I remember asking you I said, "Hey, Bill, let's go take a walk." And so we left the classroom, and then that's when we really had that powerful come to Jesus moment when you kind of laid it out, kind of where you were, and you said, "You know, Joel, this is my last chance. This is kind of an all or nothing thing." And first of all, it moved me that you felt safe enough around me to share that, but it also helped me understand where you were, but also how important it was for you to hit the ground running with your podcasts, with your business ideas, and to just take off like a rocket. And to have watched you, not just in the class, because that was a short event, but to watch you move and grow since then has been phenomenal for me on the sidelines. So congratulations, Bill.
Oh, thank you, Joel. One of the things that you said to me at that event was that, you know, you have what you need. You just need to believe in yourself and go for it. And, you know, I took that to heart. You spent the conference hanging out with me after that class. I mean,
did I?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It was really cool. You were supporting me in so many ways, and I needed to bring that level of caring and sharing to the Podcast by Friday audience, and I'm so glad you agreed to come on the show.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure, and we had a lot of fun. I remember now that I think about hanging out and doing some fun things, and then I bumped into you at Podcast Movement 2016, which was even more fun.
Oh, yeah.
So, it was a blast.
Yeah, and now Kingsley and I met at the Podcast Movement 2015 as well, so that was a pivotal thing for me. One of the parts that really focused me on taking action was some of the stuff that you were teaching in your class. And I shared some of it with Kingsley earlier today about how you, Joel, had launched your podcast to #1 in new and noteworthy in 3 categories. And that's an amazing feat. So,
And
yeah,
before I wonder here, I'm going to jump in for a second, because Joel, I find that sometimes the person who hears that, for example, the audience that we are trying to focus on, when they hear that, they get kind of intimidated because, that idea is like, oh, how can I do that? And there's something apparently that you were able to communicate and in such a manner that made Bill a believer. And I'm wondering, what would you say in that regards to that person who's listening?
That's a great question, and it's an easy answer, and it's something that I do really well. And I know this about myself, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, because as a podcaster, as a content creator, you who haven't yet launched your show, you've got to understand that if you can just create an environment where people feel safe and people feel an openness and willingness to share, that right there is going to take you far in your podcasting journey and in your content creation journey. And that's what happened when Bill and I went out in the hallway and stood man to man facing each other, sitting down actually. But that safe space was created. And I can see Bill nodding his head right now. Mm-hmm. And that's what made him feel that he could share. And that's what I do on the Relaunch show. Today was episode 508. So we've been doing
Congratulations on that.
That's amazing.
Thank you. And I think one of the reasons that it's been so successful, smoking hot, is because I can quickly create that safe space so people are going to tell me the story that they don't tell on the 10 podcasts they were on before my show. And I get that a lot. People saying, well, gosh, I've never told this story before, or I can't believe I'm actually talking about, my ex-wife or my ex-husband or the abuse that I suffered as a child or something like that. And I take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your relaunch is just doing amazing things, the relaunch show. And you were named by Podcasters Paradise as one of the best overall podcasts of 2014. Most inspirational in 2014 and 2015, both 2 years in a row. Over 1 million listeners. I mean, you're crushing it. How do you?
Yeah.
How do you transcend so many boundaries like that? It amazes me to see.
Yeah, I just don't know any better, really, and I just move forward like a bulldozer. Mm-hmm. I know I had clarity on what I wanted, the same kind of clarity that you got from the podcast 2015. You may not have known exactly what to do with it on that day when we had that first talk together, but you figured it out, and you realized that podcasting was definitely going to be a part of your future self.
Definitely.
Now, on that day when we were in the hallway, it may not have been part of your current self, but you knew it was going to be somehow a part of your future self. And that's really the only clarity that you knew. Mm-hmm. That's the only clarity that you needed at that point. And then as you walked through what we talked about and some other tutorials that you took advantage of, that's when you started seeing a path in front of you because you were taking those steps. And that's what it takes for any entrepreneur to make their show or their content successful.
So what I hear also, Joel, because you mentioned earlier about a safe place. And so I'm thinking about the person who's listening and they're thinking, okay, I got that. So I need to create a safe place. What else might be that first step, or not first step, but idea, but what are some things in addition to that I would need to actually think about getting my show launched by Friday? So it's very quick. It's overcoming procrastination. It is a minimal viable podcast idea. So the safe place may come over time, I think, because they may not necessarily know how to do that right away. So what are some other things they might need to do like right now?
Okay, fantastic. Well, the very first thing you need to do is really understand why you want to podcast. And the rallying cry of 2015, which has kind of spilled over and become kind of a moan of 2016, is I've got to monetize my podcast. I've got to monetize my podcast. I've got to monetize my podcast. My gosh, I'm sick of hearing people say that as if that's the end all be all, because that's not it. And if you give yourself that pressure, but I got to monetize my podcast, in a month, 3 months, or some ridiculous amount of time, boy, that's a recipe for a lot of frustration and will end up being failure. However, if you really understand why you want to podcast and who you want to podcast to primarily, those are the two most important things to really get your head around. Do you want to monetize? Yeah, probably. A lot of people do. Some people don't. They do it as hobbies, but a lot of people do. And that's okay. However, that's not where you start. I mean, if you're in a bad spot with your family or your finances, you don't start a podcast and try to monetize it. You go get a job and work on a side hustle.
Yes.
But you have to understand why and to whom. And let's kind of brainstorm that a little bit. So to whom? Well, the easy answer is, well, I want to podcast to everyone. And that's a nice thought, but it really is not going to take you far in the podcasting world. You got to specify who that is. So if you're, let's say, a divorced baby boomer, and you have a soft spot in your heart for people that are starting over again after their divorce as a baby boomer, well, that can be your who. It's just an example. It doesn't have to be your who, but your who is who you really want to help or who you want to provide value to, answers to. Another example might be, let's say you're a hobby gardener and you can talk gardening till you're blue in the face. I guess that would be green in the face. But gardeners could be your who. That might be who you interview or who you talk to. Doesn't have to be an interview-based show just because mine is. But you've got to understand your who. And the why is why you want to do it. And it needs to go a little bit deeper than because I want to provide value. Sure, I get that. And that's a great surface level commentary. But when I work with podcasters, and I know you do too, Kingsley and Bill, you want to deep dive. You want to go 2, 3, 4 levels deeper and figure out, okay, why is this important? Is it because gardening? That's our example. Is it because gardening did something for you? I mean, gosh, was it therapeutic for you as you were recovering, from an illness or cancer treatments or something? Let's figure out why your topic is important, and let's deep dive in it, because the people that listen to your show are probably going to appreciate and resonate with your personal story. So you want to understand that. Now that's not anything about equipment or workflow and all that stuff. However, it is even more important because there's a lot of ways to do a podcast. You can do one over a recorded phone bridge line if you want to, or you can have the highest equipment in the world. But if you're not clear on the who and the why, you're going to end up talking to nobody, and that's painful.
So when you are trying to figure out who it is that you're talking to, who you're aiming your podcast at, the niche, what are some methods that you've used in the past that help you narrow in once you've discovered the general topic?
Okay, great question. Also, the best way to figure this out is just through experimentation. You have to make a decision, and usually it's the one you feel the most excited or passionate about. And then you make that decision, and then you start putting together the pieces for speaking to that particular audience in a way that you've decided that you want to speak to them. But here's the thing, Bill. I encourage people to cut themselves a little bit of slack. Just because you make a decision today doesn't mean it's a life sentence that it's going to be with you forever. That could just be where you're at right now, the decision for today, or the decision for this week, this month, this quarter. And when you allow yourself a little bit of flexibility that way, it takes a lot of pressure off. And one of the things that I said on stage when I was in Boston a couple of weeks ago, Kingsley might remember this, is I said that I explained that Relaunch, rather, is not our first show. And it's, if you count up all the shows that I've done, both by myself, and with my wife, and also when I was doing traditional radio, it's actually my 9th show. And what that means is that there have been many trips to the batter's box and many practice swings before I finally figured out how to hit one out of the park. Now, will it take you 9 shows? No, probably not, because you're listening to this show, and this show will keep you on the straight and narrow and keep you from making the common mistakes that I've made over and over and over again. So it won't take you that long, but it took me that long. But I learned a ton in the process, and I stuck with it, which is what it takes. Here's the good news about sticking with it, though. Most people won't. Straight up. Most people won't. And if you stay in the game, you'll come out ahead. You may not come out with 1 million downloads your first couple of months, maybe even your first couple of years, but you'll be so much more ahead of the people that do 3, 4, 5 episodes and then throw in the towel, which is most people. Actually, the statistics say that most people, over 80%, don't make it past, I believe it's their 7th or 8th episode.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Which, I'm just kind of pulling those numbers out, but I know it's heavily skewed. Sorry. To the lion's share is kind of dropping off after 7 or 8 episodes.
And that's because
Joe, sorry, Bill, I just wanted to mention here that I appreciate the fact that I've heard you mention that a number of times about the fact that you have a very successful show, but yet you still are willing to make yourself vulnerable and talk about the fact that this is not your first time around. Mm-hmm. And so I hear times a little bit to this, the idea of execute fast, fail fast. Mm-hmm. What's your thought about that? Because I would hear this person who's listening is wondering, okay, does it mean that I had to fail? You clarify very well just now, but the idea we want them to get started really fast, by Friday, doesn't mean that they have to have the idea today and it's this Friday. It could be next Friday. The whole point is to get it going. So, but I wanted to kind of probe a little bit and ask you what's your thoughts about that idea of, execute fast, fail fast.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in it. And one of the things that separates the most successful entrepreneurs from the ones that are still stuck in the mud is fast execution. That is the thing that separates the rock stars from the never heard of them. Mm-hmm. Fast execution. And with fast execution comes, of course, fast failure, but that's also a fast lesson. And my friend Larry Wingett said that you just can't steer a parked car, Joel. You got to make a turn. You got to take a left. You got to take a right. And if you take a left and it's the wrong turn, well, guess what, Joel? You're gonna figure that out real quick. And if it's the correct direction, whichever direction you turn in, guess what? You're gonna figure that out, Joel, really quickly. And he's right.
Yeah.
But if you're burning up your energy, your fuel, your resources, sitting in idle, nobody benefits. You don't benefit. Your listeners don't benefit. And if you want to use it as a driver for your business, so your business isn't going to benefit either.
It's interesting that you're talking about taking fast action. One of the things that is the enemy of that is when you're second guessing yourself and trying to wonder when to take that fast action.
Sure.
Kingsley and I were talking earlier today about one of his podcasts that he is considering making a change to. And, there's that need to second guess yourself as whether you should do it or not. And, how do you deal with that decision process? Because you've had 9 shows. How did you know when it was time to take the next step?
Yeah, seek counsel. There's gosh, I'm paraphrasing here, but there is wisdom in the multitude of counselors.
Yeah,
I think I said that right, actually.
Yeah,
and that's what I did. I sought counsel. I was really enjoying the Finding Your Voice show, which is the one that I did previously to Relaunch. I was enjoying it. I was meeting a lot of interesting people. It just wasn't going anywhere, the show. Mm-hmm. And I sought counsel, and I got confirmation from 2 people, which is really all I needed, that it's time to start another show. It's time to do it right. And now I give the same advice to a lot of the podcasters that I talk to. Is that, if the wheels are spinning but going nowhere, which is where I was, let's start a new show. It doesn't mean that you don't leverage everything that you've learned. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You just take that information and use it to build a better show, which is exactly what we did, thankfully.
I like that. Thank you, Joel, because that's been helpful, not just, I guess, to our listeners, but also to me, to just a point of validation, or to say, hey, okay, it's okay. And at first, I love the phrase you said when you had a show, you were enjoying the show, meeting a lot of incredible people, but it was not going anywhere. And you were honest enough to look in the mirror and just ask yourself the question. And if it's not going anywhere, as Larry Wingett says, Joel, it's time to make a turn. It's time to turn to the next side if one doesn't work. And you did that. And that was a success to your show, or it is today. So I find in the early stages, people are very leery. And so their show may not take off, like you said earlier, right away. And they're ready to throw in a towel. But you have made a very important point. Seek counsel. Get a coach, or listen to a podcast that like Podcast by Friday, Relaunch, podcasts that really are very practical. And I like the fact that one of those things that you do, Joel, is you go to the practical parts of every interview I've listened to you. You will at some point say, okay, now this show is about the practical nature. And you would kind of go there and to give people helpful advice. So I'm hearing that's a valuable portion of the show. What else are you looking for that you're hoping that guest in the interview format can give to your audience that will be helpful? So practical advice, but what else are you hoping for? The story is also here. What primarily are you looking for?
I didn't quite understand the question. You set it up really good, but you said, what am I looking for? How?
What's the primary thing you're looking for the audience when you're probing your guests for the practical things, but also to the story? I'm wondering, in your mind, what are you hoping to get from them that will be helpful to your audience?
Oh, sure. Okay, that's a good question. I understand it. Thanks for the clarification. One of the things that I'm looking for is what they've done in a practical nature that has helped them. And I interview a variety, not a variety, but a rich diversity of people with various experience. And everyone has something that we can learn from. And even if the person is not in that particular industry or they don't do the same thing, success leaves clues. And they're highly transferable. So if we learn some success principles from one person on how they made their thing work, well, we can transfer it to what it is that we do, or what it is that you're trying to do with your business, with your podcast, with your blog, your YouTube channel, because success does leave those little helpful hints, and if we just listen and suspend judgment, we can learn a ton. And we might have to tweak it a little bit for our personal style, but the information is solid. Mm-hmm. The success information, and that's what I hope to draw from our guests. Is let's talk practicality, and I approach it that way because people understand practical nature of what they've done, but really the value that they're not talking about is that it's transferable in multiple areas.
Which leads me into my other question I want to ask, because we're coming down to the end of our time here. But I wondered, Joel, because what is a practical thing that I'm looking for from you here is you've done several shows. How important it is for the name of the show. So that idea of choosing the right name, or as close as possible, how important is that? And how would a person go about trying to get the best possible name for their show?
Okay, that's a great question. So what I would do, and what I did, is I would look for a show title or subtitle that has SEO juice. SEO juice. Now, okay, look at my the title of my show. It's a one-word title. I wanted a one-word title. I searched and I prayed and I brainstormed and I did a lot of things. And I was crawling through my house on my hands and knees, going through old books and looking at titles and things of that nature. And God gave that one word to me. And I remember I called my wife to come running from across the house, took her by the shoulders, and I looked at her in the eyes and I said, relaunch. And we knew we had it. However, no one goes on Google and searches relaunch. We know that. So maybe more people are now, because that word is being used a lot, not just in my show, but in other situations as well. However, our subtitle is Starting Over with Confidence. And if you do your SEO research, starting over has got the juice. It's got the SEO juice because a lot of people are starting over. They're starting over at 40, starting over at 50, starting over at 70, 60. So starting over has juice. And then confidence is a very much searched word. So relaunch, not so much, but the subtitle nails it. And that is what has helped us. There are many things. There's no one thing that's helped us, but that's just one of the things that we still have in our arsenal as we're still trying to figure out this high-tech world, as we all are as content creators.
You know what?
Thank you,
Joel. That was amazing. There's one thing that sticks out in my mind when I think about how you do what you do, and that is you gather together people to help you. Now, one of the things that I learned in your course was that you build up launch teams when you get ready to launch your new podcast. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes. And I'm delighted to, because that is the number one thing that you can do for yourself today. And if today we're recording the show on Monday, so let's just pretend it's Monday whenever you are hearing this, listening to this show. And if you want to launch your podcast by Friday, well, the onus is going to be on you to quickly assemble a launch team. And your launch team, they don't have to be podcasters, and frankly, they don't even have to know what a podcast is. However, they need to be people that know you, like you, trust you, and also want you to succeed. And that's the criteria right there. These aren't strangers. These aren't people that you casually almost know. Maybe you bump into at church from time to time, or you wave at each other when you pass each other driving on a neighborhood street. But these are actually people that know you and that you know them. And you want to start gathering together people and letting them know, hey, I've got a podcast. I'm really excited. My goal is to hit the top spots in iTunes or on Stitcher or in one of the other directories, if that is your goal, and that you would love some help. You would love a little bit of promotional support, and let them say yes. People want to help you. I don't know if that was a struggle for you, Bill, but that was a struggle for a lot of the podcast students in that class that you took, is that, they had to get over asking for help, number one, and then they had to convince themselves that, oh my gosh, people actually don't hate me or want me to go away, but they actually will help me if I ask. And that was an eye opener for a lot of people.
It's funny when you say that, because I was very skeptical at first when you said that, and when I began to talk to the folks, like you suggested, I was surprised at the momentum that built up, and people were, oh yeah, we'll help you, and that's the difference when you're talking to people who like and trust you.
Now, how do you do this? Because that's the follow-up question. What you can do is you can take your iPhone or your Droid, and you can just start scrolling through your contacts. That's the example that I used last time I was on stage. Just pick up your phone, scroll through your contacts. Don't decide for them. Let them make the decision of if they're going to help or not. But that's where probably the lion's share of the people that you know are right here. You probably know more people than are in your phone, but that's a great place to get started. And I find that is a deterrent for getting stuck, because a lot of folks, in my experience, they find out, okay, I understand the theory and concept, but where do I find these people? Do I go door to door? Do I get out a phone book? What do I do? You just go through your personal phone book, for starters, and that can get the ball rolling.
Well, Joel, I know you provided great content, great value for our show tonight, and this recording here. And I wonder if there's possibly, you who are, you're an expert in this area of helping people get their shows started, that you specialize in that, and I know you have different products, different helpful products for people who might want to know more about that. But also, before we ask you where is the best place to find out more about you and what you have that our audience might benefit from, would there be one last parting piece of advice or you would give to that person, again, in their early startup stage, that maybe we didn't cover tonight? You said, this is something I think we need to leave with them even before we wrap this show up.
Yes, and thank you for asking. And this has been a pleasure, guys, for me to be your very first interview. That means more to me than probably either one of you realize or know. So thank you. And congratulations on making this show happen, too, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Indeed. Much. Okay, so parting piece of advice. Don't do this alone. Don't do it alone. Work with Bill. Work with Kingsley. If you'd like to work with me, you can hit me up on our website. That's fine. I'm not worried about that. But work with someone who has your best interest at heart. And don't try to figure this out. You can, but it takes a long time to do it. Your best bet is to work with someone who has already learned how to do this and has been successful with their show, like Bill, like Kingsley. Not someone who's still trying to figure out how to upload an episode or how to do a show, but make sure you work with someone who has actually pulled this off with their own personal show. Results never lie. It's another thing that Wing It told me. He told me, he said, not me personally, but he said this one time. He said, if you ever want to know if a person's telling you the truth, just look at their bank account, because results never lie. And you know what? Even if you're not talking about finances, the same thing holds true. Results never lie. Just don't do it by yourself. Link arms with someone and make it happen. And just learn from every single one of their experiences. Yeah, of course, you'll tweak it to your own style. But again, success leaves clues. And if you pick them up all along the way, you'll do great with your show.
Joel, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, best thing to do is just go to relaunchshow.com. And of course, like everybody, I've got all the silly social media links there. But you know what? I'm not really concerned about more Twitter followers or more Facebook friends or whatever, because that didn't really even count anymore. But what I would really love for you to do is just visit the website and then click on the player, the podcast player. You can go to Stitcher, go to iTunes, you can go to some other places, and just give the show a sample listen and see if it's something that could add value to your journey and also to your life. And if it is, I'd really appreciate you subscribing to the show. And if you like what you hear, just leaving us a rating and a review. And I think that is the best way to really understand kind of what I'm all about and what the Relaunch show is all about. And I'd be glad you did, hopefully.
Joel, you've been so generous in giving us your time today, but I'd like to ask one more favor.
Shoot.
You have a letter that you gave us that talked about getting your launch team together. And I know that you've discussed this in the Relaunch Elite group that you have on Facebook. Could you maybe give our listeners a chance to get an idea of that email? I think that would be something that they could benefit from right away in knowing how to contact folks in their team and how to ask.
Sure, you bet. Of course, all of the email templates, I've already written them for you. That's available in the Launch Your Number One podcast course. And if you sign up for that course, all the work is already done for you. But aside from that, the email that Bill is talking about, are you talking about assembling the launch team or calling them to action?
Calling them to action.
Okay, great. So what you need to do, let's say you have a launch team put together already. Let's just use an easy number. Let's say it's 100 people. And you need to be crystal clear, specific on what it is that you want them to do and when you want to do that, when you want them to do that. And here's what I did. I held their hand every step of the way. And in the email that I sent them, I had a timeline laid out. And I don't remember the exact dates, but let's say I launched my show on May 1st, which was roughly right then. Well, I let people know in the email, May 1st, the starting gun goes off. And that's when our show is launched and live. And what I need for you to do is, rate, review, and subscribe to our show between 8 a.m. and noon local time on such and such date, May 1st, May 2nd, whatever it was. And then, so that gives people a time frame and instructions on what to do. Of course, I would tell them how to subscribe and leave a rating and a review and all that. Most people aren't tech savvy, and they're definitely not podcast savvy, most people. So you got to have some kid gloves on when you're helping people learn the ropes. And then what I would do after that, this is all in the email, is I would give people instructions on how they can help promote the show in social media and to their networks. Again, most people aren't tech savvy. They're happy to help, but you got to make it third grade simple for them to do it. And I gave everything. I wrote all the social media posts for my launch team on Twitter and Facebook. And the reason I did it is because, well, most people don't know how. And I didn't want the lack of a person's understanding or creativity to be a stumbling block. So what I did, and this is definitely heavy lifting, but I was serious about what I was trying to accomplish with my show. I wrote them all. The tweets, the posts, created the artwork, because I wanted to be, this was my responsibility to do. I didn't want to impose on someone on my launch team and say, oh, by the way, can you create a quick picture on Canva? Or, hey, can you write a pithy this or that? That's asking a little bit too much, in my opinion. And my launch, it went off, boom, like a shot. We had our first number one 12 days from launch day. And then for the entire new and noteworthy period, we were just hitting multiple number ones throughout pretty much the entire time. And that success, that quick launch, helped me to get invited to the first podcast movement. That was 2014. About 500 people there, if you can believe that, Bill. To being invited back to speak 2015. That's when we met. And then now 2016 just happened, and 3 years in a row I've been there, and the attendance was 1,500 podcasters this year, and next year is probably going to bust 2,000. So
yeah, it's doubling every year. Now I know that Joel's course is fantastic, because that's what I used when I launched my podcast, and I was able to get to number 2 in technology.
Cool.
Using that in a very quick period. So, Joel, give them the link if they would like to look into your course.
Yeah, you bet. It's relaunchshow.com/1, the number 1 launch. Relaunchshow.com/1. That's the number 1 launch.
Awesome. Joel, we can't say thank you enough for being here on the podcast by Friday.
No, just try.
I'll try. Thank you so much, Joel, for being here on this show on a podcast by Friday and bring great value. We were ourselves very enriched by your just being open and willing to share such, as Bill says, valuable content in just a short time. So I guess that as you listen today, you can hear that if he can do this in such a short time, imagine working with Joel for a longer period of time, how much he can do for you and your show. So on behalf of the Podcast by Friday community, we want to say a big thank you, Joel.
The pleasure was mine, guys. Thank you so much for having me on. And let's see, Bill, I'll see you in Philly, and Kingsley, I will see you in D.C.
Yes, sir.
Fantastic.
A fantastic night, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Hey, folks, I hope you enjoyed our interview with Joel Boggess, the host of the Relaunch Show. We know he delivered lots of valuable information to us on how to take bold action to move forward like a bulldozer to launch our podcast quickly. If you'd like more information about Joel Boggess, his show, and the things that were covered in this episode, you can go to podcastbyfriday.com/06. Podcast by Friday. Take bold action to create your minimal viable podcast today. Check out new episodes at podcastbyfriday.com or on iTunes or Spreaker.